Welcome to another edition of David Bryant Reports. I am David Bryant. Today I want to talk to you about politics because we're just a few days away from the presidential election. And I want to tell you about the political party I believe every Christian should belong to. And I also want to tell you where I think things are going to come out ultimately on November 5th, the day of the presidential election. You know, I've been involved in politics quite a bit over my life. I've actually, through no fault of my own, met with, preached to, prayed with 5 different presidents of the United States. So I want to bring my experience in politics, going back to even when I was a high school student. I want to bring some of that to bear on a key passage in Acts chapter 11, one of the most political passages in the entire Bible. And if the event I'm about to describe for you had not happened, you and I would not be looking at each other right now because there would be no Christian movement. In Acts chapter 11, we read the story of the forming of the church in Antioch. Now, Antioch was the 3rd largest city in the Roman Empire. It was cosmopolitan. It had people in it from every part of the Roman Empire. They had seen everything that there was to see, or so they thought, until something happened in Antioch that no one had ever seen before. Here's what happened. After a few years of the church growing in Jerusalem, the Jewish leaders decided we've got to crush this movement once and for all. And so persecution broke out with the church in Jerusalem, and many of the members scattered, and some went north up into Phoenicia, and some of them went over into the island of Cyprus. Some went on into Antioch, but wherever they went, they were preaching the gospel, but only to Jewish people in their synagogues. But finally, we read in Acts 11 that a couple of them decided they would preach the gospel to Gentiles, to pagans. And when they did, to their absolute surprise, there was a great people movement that took place. In the space of about 6 verses, we read 3 times, many people, many people, many people. They were turning to the Lord right and left. Well, when the report came back to the leaders of the church in Jerusalem, they said, wait a minute, is this some kind of a cult that's happened? So they decided to send over Barnabas, who was full of the Holy Spirit, one of the leaders of the church in Jerusalem, to check it out. And we read in Acts 11, when Barnabas got there and saw what was happening, he knew right away this was a powerful work of the grace of God. So that's the report he sent back, but he decided to stay and work with that church. And again, many people kept coming to Christ. And he was trying to work at discipling them, and it became too much for him. So he decided he would go and get the apostle, the one who became known as the Apostle Paul. But at that time, he was known still as Saul. Saul, who had converted on the Damascus road. You remember that story. And he then fled to Damascus, where he was then chased by the Jewish leaders trying to kill him, and he had to escape late in the middle of the night, and he headed back to his hometown of Tarsus, which is about 145 miles away from Antioch. And that's where he's been for 10 years, and we haven't heard anything about him. So what's Saul, who became Paul, what's he been doing up there in Tarsus? Well, it's clear he's been studying the Old Testament scriptures. He's been digging out everything he can find about who Jesus is, the fulfillment of God's promises and God's purposes and God's prophecies. He's been thinking through the implications of everything Jesus did, his incarnation, crucifixion, resurrection, ascension. And you know all of that's inside of him when Barnabas gets him, because soon after that he starts writing these glorious letters, the book to the Romans, the book of Ephesians, Colossians, the book to the Thessalonians. So Paul has all of that inside of him already, 10 years of study. And now Barnabas brings it back to Antioch. They begin to disciple this massive movement of people to Christ. And it says they kept working at this for a year, and then it was in Antioch. We read in verse 26, it was in Antioch where the disciples were first called Christians. What does the word Christian mean? Well, it's 2 words put together in the Greek. It's the word Christos, which means Messiah, the anointed one, the one God has anointed to be King of kings and Lord of lords, to fulfill all of his purposes, to bring everything to consummation under his Lord, the Lamb who is at the center of the throne, everything and much more. That's what it means, Christos. And then to that, we add in the Greek the IAN ending, which means of the party of the party of the Messiah. That is a political term. Now, here's what happens. It says they were called Christians. In other words, the citizens of Antioch watched what was going on, especially after Paul got there and started pouring his vision of Christ into these people. And they said, we've never seen anything like this. We don't have any words to describe it. So they made up a new word in the Greek, Christian, which means it's a political term of the party of the Christ. Just like you could say, I'm the party of Harris, or I am the party of Trump. I'm a Republican. I'm a Democrat. Christian means I'm the party. In other words, his agenda is my agenda. His purposes are my purpose. His success is my success. His future is my future. That's what you say about a candidate that you're really for, especially those who are so fanatical now for either Harris or Trump at this moment in time. That's what they saw there in Antioch. Only it was all about a person whom God has anointed to be the King, the Lord. You know, it says in Ephesians that God has exalted him above every name that is named, both in this age and the age to come. He's exalted above every name, which includes Vice President Harris, and includes previous President Trump, and includes every other person that's up and down the ballot when you go to vote. He is above every one of those. He is Lord over it all. He is, for us as believers, he is our candidate. His kingdom is what our platform is all about. His campaign is what Paul says about us being led in a victory procession to spread the knowledge of Christ everywhere. That's our campaign. And he's the one who's going to ultimately win, because he already has. And you say, well, who's going to win on November 5th? I'll tell you who's going to win. Whoever ends up in the office of president, there's someone over that office. There's someone over this nation who is Lord of all the nations, who is our only hope and our only Redeemer. And he's the one to whom we should give our hearts, to his agenda, to his purposes, to his success, and to his ultimate glory. You know, when I prayed with one of those presidents in the Oval Office, holding his hand, I prayed that God would help him to experience the fact that Jesus' wisdom and Jesus' authority was over him every day in everything he did. And so it is true, not only for the president, but for each one of us. Well, that's my report for today. I look forward to sharing more with you next time about looking at life through King Jesus glasses. And I hope to see you then.